Hi everyone, and welcome to the next installment on the Chorus tournament. Yesterday saw round 5 and 2 wins. Incredibly, Shirov's perfect performance continues, and he is now on 5 out of 5 after defeating Loek van Wely. The only other win of the round went to Vladimir Kramnik, who played a perk against Jan Smeets, who's having a disastrous tournament with only half a point after 5 games. I figured we'd have a look at another of Shirov's games, as he seems to be on fire at the moment. Van Wely had the white pieces and opened with c4, which is known as the English opening, and tends to lead to positional games, although it has a lot of transpositional potential and often turns into a d4 opening, depending on how black plays. Shirov answered with e5, so we have a reverse Sicilian, which, as you can imagine, can be pretty dangerous for black, as he's playing against a Sicilian with tempo. However, this extra move often takes the game into rarely seen positions in the Sicilian, although some of the general principles of the defence still hold, i.e. white will often gain 2 centre pawns against one and a semi-open c-file to work with, whilst black gains d-file pressure and a strong early grip on the centre. So play continued with knight c3, knight f6, knight f3 and knight c6, which is the 4 knights variation of the English opening. And Van Wely now went into the fianchetto sub-variation with g3, so in many ways the position will resemble a Sicilian dragon now, except for colours being reversed and black being unlikely to castle long because it would probably be too dangerous. So d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, and bishop g2, which is threatening to win a pawn with knight takes e5, discovering a second attacker on the d5 knight. So Shirov played knight b6, and then Van Wely castled, bishop e7 and a3, which is the last book move of the game because Shirov now played the aggressive g5, making his mindset clear. Despite having a big lead in the tournament, he's clearly decided it's not time to play safe and try and consolidate his advantage with safe play and draws, and this is daring play, especially with the black pieces. It creates glaring dark square weaknesses with the hope of creating kingside initiative and proving that Van Wely has perhaps castled too soon with this rook, bearing down on the h-file. And he responded calmly with d3, and now Shirov continued with g4, attaining a small edge already according to Fritz, after knight d2. So now he played h5, just bolstering the g-pawn and securing this gained space on the king side, at least for a while. And Van Wely was now compelled to find play on the other wing with b4, which makes sense as Shirov would be very unlikely to castle kingside after moving up these pawns. So Van Wely pursues a preemptive pawn storm whilst preparing bishop b2 in many lines, although he didn't play it in the game. Shirov mercilessly continued on the king side now with h4, and now came knight c4, perhaps hoping for an exchange of queens after knight takes c4 and d takes c4, but Shirov of course didn't want that given his aggressive kingside strategy, which he now continued with h takes g3. And Van Wely recaptured with the h-pawn, which is, capturing towards the center, and it's a wise decision. Recapturing with the f-pawn instead would create a permanent weakness at e3 and also fail to tactics like knight takes b4, and after a takes b4, queen d4 check, winning back the material with this knight here at c3 and finishing up a pawn ahead. And the open h-file is of course dangerous, and Van Wely takes good care to ensure that it doesn't become a serious problem. So here Shirov played knight takes c4, and after knight takes c4 he played knight d4, which is preventing the exchange of queens and setting a positionally minded trap. If Van Wely had played e3 now, hoping to force the exchange of queens, now comes knight f3 check, forcing bishop takes f3 and g takes f3, gaining black a dangerous bishop pair, especially given the light squared bishop, as white has fianchettoed and now lost the vital bishop that was on g2 for a knight. Queen takes f3 would be more or less forced now, and the black bishops are going to be strong. If instead queen takes d8 check, hoping to simplify and make the position a little less dangerous, now white is losing after bishop takes d8 because he's helpless against the threat of bishop h3 to g2 and then rook h1, which is going to be mating if white does nothing about it. And Fritz gives white as being 2 pawns down, objectively speaking, in this position, so it's effectively a one game for black. So Van Wely sidestepped that, naturally enough, and he played knight b5. And now came knight e6, which was a surprising move from Shirov, as it allows the exchange of queens and gives white a slight edge with best play. Equality could have been gained instead with knight takes b5. After queen takes d8, king takes d8, c takes b5. According to Fritz, this is equal. However, Van Wely elected not to exchange queens in the game continuation, and played instead, after knight e6, queen c2, which makes it dead equal. Not wanting to trade queens given the weakening moves that Shirov has played here on the king's side, and considering that Shirov's king is still in the center, is understandable. And although it leads to less exciting games, knowing when it's correct to get queens off the board is an important skill, and Van Wely should have done so here. He could have got an edge instead of queen c2 with queen takes d8 check, and after bishop takes d8, bishop e3 with better development, pawn structure and some initiative. Fritz puts white at about half a pawn up in this position, but Van Wely played queen c2, wanting to keep the queens on the board, and Shirov answered with c6 to evict the knight, but Van Wely had other plans for it, after rook d1 threatening the queen, and bishop d7, which is the best move that black has, although it's giving up the bishop pair after knight d6 check, forcing bishop takes d6 and rook takes d6. And now white will be able to exploit black's dark square weakness very easily with this dark squared bishop, but black still has a small edge regardless in this position here now, and the initiative as well, after queen e7 attacking the rook here. And Van Wely defended with queen d3, which most people are agreed was an oversight on his part. Better was rook d2, where after knight d4, queen d1, and bishop e6, it's again equal. The problem with queen d3 is knight d4, and this is the reason why defending the rook with the queen is bad, because this just about forces rook takes d4. The only other possibility was rook h6, but black would get good play after rook takes h6, bishop takes h6, and bishop f5 with roughly the same edge as in the game continuation. So Van Wely sacks the exchange instead. After knight d4 he played rook takes d4. Now came e takes d4 and queen takes d4. So he gets a pawn for the exchange, and he opens up the position for his now strong bishop pair, while the black king still remains in the center, so there is some compensation for being the exchange down. And white keeps the initiative too, due to the threat of queen takes h8. So Shirov reacted calmly with rook h5, which is the best move at black's disposal. Bishop f4 is how Van Wely continued, which is another suboptimal move, just sacking the e2 pawn for development and control of the bad weakness in the black position, this d6 square. So queen takes e2. Shirov accepted the gambit. Now came rook d1, which was another inaccuracy from Van Wely, according to Fritz. Although it's starting to become clear that his plan to exploit black's lack of development and coordination at the expense of material is, what he's planning for the middle game. He's willing to sack a pawn or two to get his pieces, get activity. I mean, they are all well posted now, but rook d1 apparently was not the best move, according to Fritz. I mean, with this setup, it's a good plan if Shirov makes it. One tiny mistake and the whole position will come crashing down, but he didn't. Instead of rook d1, bishop g5 was better. It forces f6 if Shirov wants to keep any kind of advantage. If instead rook takes g5, now white is winning with queen h8 check, king e7, and queen takes a8. So f6 is forced. Now bishop takes f6, and bishop f5 once again restores equality, although black's king is now very exposed and he'll have to be even more careful than before. But rook d1 was the game continuation. Okay, that's the end of part 1.